Okay, let's get started then. Hey guys, welcome to the Meshery development call. So, it's a ritual around here to start our calls with getting introduced with our newcomers. So, are there any newcomers on the call who would introduce themselves, or any old timers who want to introduce themselves again?
Hi, everybody. I'm a fairly newcomer. My plan is to kind of lurk for a little bit, but I've been following the project for some time from afar.
Hey Matt.
And I guess in the way of intro, I'm one of the co-chairs for tag observability and generally a nerd for service meshes and open source.
It took me forever to find my mute button. He said nerd, and I just couldn't help but comment. It's just like, yeah, perfect. Among the 19 other things that Matt is doing, Matt is also reviewing the Service Mesh Patterns book, which has a lot to do with a lot of the work that many of you have done or are doing. We might even talk about the catalog today. So anyway, that's just great.
Oh, fun. I guess if I was to be a little bit funny, a long-time listener, first-time caller. If you ever lived in Seattle, I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else who would like to introduce themselves? Saidin, I think this is your first call. Go ahead, please.
Hello, my name is Sirin Gamoudi. I'm from Tunisia. I joined the Layer 5 Slack 2 weeks ago, and I'm kind of discovering everything. Well, I already have an issue I'm working on, but yeah, still discovering things. That's
Awesome.
it.
Good to have you here. All right. So that's all the newcomers I see. All right, let's get started with the agenda then. Uzair, you're up first. Would you like to?
Yes.
There you go.
Hope my screen is visible. So fixed broker MeshSync connectivity test. So this is regarding we perform connectivity tests from server to detect that whether our meshery components like broker or MeshSync is functional correctly or not. And the tests currently are misleading because they don't represent the actual current state of the meshery components. So I was working towards making those tests reflect what the correct status is. So this is the PR I have created. So this is here I've described what this does is, and while I was working and testing this this new test that I've created, I found a weird behavior that when I was testing in multi-cluster environment, I had Minikube and Docker desktop up and running, and in Minikube, the meshery-broker service was not exposed. That is, external IP was not yet provided. It was in pending state, but still I was able to connect to the meshery-broker, the external endpoint, the external address and port was populated for the CR. So when I dig into that, what may be the problem, I found that we use this get endpoint for populating those fields or attributes in custom resource. And here we check that if it is a load balancer, we check whether the status is in pending state or what is the state. And if it is still in pending state, we then also populate this address, like this node port is populated and address is populated, because of which I think it is conflicting behavior. So if before proceeding ahead with removing this or making this function correct, I want to ask, like, this behavior is relevant, or why is this such a behavior?
So I know that Mr. Young is intending to lurk a little more. and he might not have heard just what you just described, but it strikes me that he might have an opinion here. And so
truth be told, as you were describing that, I was like bringing up links for all of the things that we're talking about. Could you do me the do me the embarrassing honor of like a TLDR? I'm sorry. So
I think it would be good for everybody, actually, including me, which is to say that, so in order for Meshery to manage Kubernetes clusters, it requires deployment of the Meshery operator. The operator has two custom controllers. One is just a NAT server to help with communication between the operator and Meshery server. The second one is MeshSync, which communicates with Kubernetes or subscribes to Kubernetes events using Kubernetes informers. And in order for Meshery server to be a NATS client of that broker, of that NATS broker, we need to expose NATS as a Kubernetes service. So particularly in the case where Meshery server is deployed external to the cluster, So the question becomes, okay, like, it's environment specific, what type of Kubernetes networking should be. And it's like, well, we ship with a default of load balancer for the service type.
So there's a service type called external service, which is meant to expose a routable yet potentially external, although not necessarily external to the Kubernetes cluster service endpoints, an IP address, but to expose it in the context of cluster local DNS. So you get like, cluster.local.svc.local.namespace. So like in the ontology of services and service discovery, you can surface something outside the cluster via a service type of external service or a load balancer. 1 second, I can get an example. We used to use this as part of like, if you're familiar with like a strangler fig pattern where you're decomposing a monolith into microservices, you might want to put the initial set of microservices that's your end state and expose them as Kubernetes services, for a cloud native application, so that when you're running locally or in an arbitrary cluster, wherever, you've got, a portable definition that is inclusive of configuration for services. But they're not there yet. They're still back in the monolith off on a Rails instance or something like that. That's where you would use one of these external service type services. I'll grab a link and throw it in the chat. But
okay, yeah.
That's how I would model it, and that way all the default Kubernetes stuff just works, and it doesn't become like a bespoke thing that you have to maintain in an ancillary system and or distributed store. It's a hard problem. Right? Here, let me get the link.
Which makes sense. And so as in the that begs, there's the question of the MeshSync custom resource, which has a few different attributes. And one of those attributes is tracking of its cluster local IP address and its external IP address. And for Meshery server, the majority of the time, or in the case where a Meshery server is deployed external to the cluster, it reads from that custom resource looking at the external IP address field, and then uses that IP address or that host name to try to connect its NATS client, try to talk to meshery-broker. And so Uzair, that's in part, that's more or less what you were articulating, is that's the behavior. But more than that, so we certainly run into the case where it's very environment specific how networking is configured, how DNS is configured, and we're trying to reduce the time to value for people for users, and we're trying to be a little bit intelligent about sort of the happy path, like particularly to the extent that someone is deployed on Docker desktop, for example, where it makes Kubernetes networking on your local host very, very easy if the external IP address here, if we ship by default with a service type of load balancer, in the case of Docker Desktop, you would also then get an external IP address populated. For Docker Desktop, that would be localhost. If you did Minikube, it's more of a pain in the rump because you might have to load up an external, an add-on like Modal LB or some other networking solution to make sure that you can get an external IP address populated. I guess, so thus far, Uzair, we haven't helped at all. One question before I potentially make some suggestions. So one question is, are you aware of the behavior in Meshery today? If Meshery is deployed in cluster, so local to the broker, do you know if Meshery will use the internal IP address, or will it continue to just always use the external IP address?
No, I'm not sure about that.
Something to look into, just to, and then yeah, this is a, like, it makes intuitive sense that if there's an external IP address populated, hey, that's what Meshery server should be attempting to use, or should be using to attempt to communicate with meshery-broker. And part of your question, Uzair, it was the mechanics by which Meshery examines the external IP address value and then records that into the custom resource. One, I think that's probably a one-time thing that's happening. So, oh, no, actually, I can't recall. Like if you go in and a user manually edits the deployment type, the service type from load balancer to like cluster IP or node IP, is the operator reconciling that back to load balancer? Is it undoing that configuration?
No, in that case, it is not doing that.
Okay. Okay, so part of,
yes, I will further look into it, how to improve that. Afterwards, maybe we can discuss. And the next second thing was when we were resetting database and broker was not connected to Meshery server, the server was panicking, so I fixed that. And another, I'm working towards subscriptions for the context menu. Like now, if cluster is deleted, but then also in the UI. Context is shown, like it is not, we have to refresh the page. So I'm working towards making a subscription for that. So these are my updates.
nice. I suspect on the first topic, we didn't quite help you. We left you with 2 questions, not answers. Of what Matt has pointed out about external name. I think I have some reading to do because
Yeah, like the point being, like, instead of a selector to identify a service in configuration, if you create an external name, you're basically saying you can use this name in lieu of a selector. And on the backside, instead of pointing to a load balancer or to a cluster IP, it points to an arbitrary routable IP.
Oh,
right? So it kind of demands that outside of the cluster, it's findable either because the DNS that the cluster is beholden to, either a local DNS resolver, or we're seeing a rise in layer 3. I think Lee, you just talked about that at TLC meeting yesterday about network service mesh, right? So there are other ways to make network topologies happen other than reliance on DNS hierarchies. I've always thought PNRP would be cool, but in any event, that's kind of what I meant about the external IP. And I don't know if that's an external name, rather. I don't know if that actually is a solution for you here, depending on your goals. But if it's to have something portable, then you could take the service type as configuration to an operator action or the Helm chart that it tells the operator, and then like the user you could do something by default, right? But then like, oh, by the way, if you're going to run Nats as a local Docker container for iteration or in your own infrastructure, you have an existing NATS implementation that's hardened at scale, right? And I want to use that instead. I want to bring my own NATS. Like that would be the scenario where you could optionally have a service type override to say, hey, when you go make the endpoint that everyone standardizes on, which looks and feels just like a Kubernetes service, which I know how to talk to either through selectors and configuration for some things, if you're doing tunneling or whatever, by configuration, or you know, the scenario I described.
Yeah.
I mean, you can support that, and that just make that an implementation detail that's settable by configuration. But for all intents and purposes, you don't know or care that it's not hosted in the cluster as a workload, which you would refer to by a service. Right, so you can actually get some weird. You have to be careful too, because like I don't actually know what happens if you have a service type external name and then you associate it with an ingress. You know, like you could bridge things inadvertently. I haven't explored those. We used it for the scenarios I described, as well as a handy, quick way to glue in on-premise databases as part of a migration to something like RDS over time.
One thing that if anybody else was almost able to keep up with Matt, one thing he was highlighting and is evident is that users need to have it, need to make intelligent guesses, be somewhat opinionated about just working in hopefully the majority of cases. There'll be any number of cases where people are earnestly and seriously using meshery into their bespoke environment that, given the high configurability of networking, that Uzair, one thing to take away is the need to allow the user to reconfigure. That'll be helpful just even in the various configurations that you all deploy meshery, that someone could go in ideally to the settings user interface and dictate either a different value for what's inside of the CR. And to Matt's point, it's good to be aware of this external name configuration, which if to put it into different terms, the way that I digest the concept of external name is in essence like a point of redirection, like a host name that you might specify that is just your default moniker for how you might point to where meshery-broker is. But if the underlying networking is different, you could still potentially reference the same external name. Matt, am I bastardizing that? If to think of it as like a DNS or a host name in DNS that.
Yes, exactly. Like you could set it to a host name. I put something in chat. Sometimes in the morning, it's still the morning for me. In the morning, I can write better than I can talk.
Oh yeah. Oh,
but yeah, I mean, in my mind, whether it's the weird, probably edge case scenario of someone who really, really wants to run this seriously and has an existing NATS thing, that's more of a database use case, but NATS is fine too. Like it should be possible to use that. Like NATS is just always looks like a Kubernetes hosted service, and if it's running in local Docker, and then we're running this in kind, you can use one way to configure it. But if you're running everything all in one, so that it just works out of the box, even though there's no boxes anymore, just default to a Kubernetes service that's actually a hosted Kubernetes service in cluster. Right? But you're removing the concern of caring where it is because it always looks local.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's highly appropriate. Thank you for that, Matt. Thank you.
As an idea, with lacking context or depth of knowing anything. So I'm going to go back to working.
All right. Any other feedback on that? All right. Thank you, Uzair, Matt, and Lee for sharing that. Moving on, we have Abhi. Abhi, would you like to speak about the Eslint errors?
Yeah. Just sharing my screen. Yeah, so we have been advancing in some ESLint errors. So past week or two, we had experienced some idiotic, like very childish behavior for our past mistakes, that some UI were breaking because of some undef checks not getting caught on time. So undef is actually very important check. So this needs to be caught, and this was in off state for ESLint for a very long time. So getting the help from Yash and all, we have been able to do some progress here. So yeah, so other than that, there are two more important checks that needs to be enabled, just like we have enabled undef checks, and therefore some code needs to be changed with respect to it. So yeah, we have it. So this is the issue depicting here. I mean, you can see it here, and I already see interestees. So thank you, Kamal. And yeah, one more important thing is enable GitHub workflows. So we have been running a whole lot of workflows on opening a pull request. So adding one more to check the UI links and when we are committing, so it the ESLint checks runs as a pre-commit hook, but those can be suppressed by the contributor. But if it is inside the GitHub workflows itself, it won't go missed. It won't get missed by any of the reviewers. So just a small check, like I have classified those two issues as the first timers issue, or one who is new to the project, or the newcomers. I have labeled it as a newcomers because it is actually a newcomers issue. So those who are just wanting to start out with meshery layer 5 and UI stuff, so they can definitely show their interest there. Yeah, so actually that was update on ESLint.
If anyone's interested, you guys can either signal on Slack, or you can also write down your name in the minute itself. If
Yeah,
anyone wants to volunteer right off.
yeah, that would be good.
Any feedback and comment on what Abhishek shared with us?
It's got to be done. It's too painful when those checks aren't there. Failed releases and that kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. So these are kind of the high priority issues. So if no one is there to pick it up in a required time, so we will probably fix it ourselves. So and these are really first timers issues. So if you are really wanted to get started, so that's a great first pick for you.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Abhi. Moving on, Subedy, would you go ahead with your updates? I don't think Subedy is on the call. Okay, we can circle back later on if he joins. Harkirat, would you like to share your topic here?
Sure, Aditya. Yeah, you can open that PR in your desktop as well. So earlier the search was like dysfunctional. After this PR, it has been merged now. So you can probably check the video. Like it's working fine. Like the search bar is like correct.
Yep.
That was a small update from my side. Thank
Alright.
you.
That's great. Thank you.
Just to comment on that for a second, the the search is I guess greedy is maybe the right way of putting it, is that let's say that your connection was Minikube, that if you started searching and you started your search with Minikube would still be displayed because part of its letter matches. And so
Okay,
just
I can like probably create a new PR for that. if you
no,
want.
no, actually,
Okay.
I don't know that. I was just kind of just a remark for everybody else, just to reinforce that, like, one, that I thought it was important enough to go test, and then two, sometimes that's really helpful, because people might eventually, if someone loads up like 10 contexts, 50 contexts, maybe some of those refer to the same cluster, maybe those are different clusters, but if they have a naming scheme, as an example, maybe they have dev east, dev west, dev south, and instead of having to type out dev hyphen and then the search term, they can just jump directly to south. And so yeah, so good job. I think it does well.
All right, moving on. Thank you, Harkirat. Moving on, Ruturaj, would you like to share your screen for your topic?
Yep. Yeah, so the PR, this is about giving the user feedback when they upload a new Kubernetes context. So let me just demo it. So right now I've added a couple contexts, and I have a kubeconfig file which has one extra context. If I import it like that, it'll tell you that some of the context already exists, and that one new context was added in the Snackbars. So yeah, so there's changes on Meshery server and Meshery cloud. So yeah, please review it. And there is some UI changes also. So this is the first time I have contributed to UI. So make sure I didn't break anything. And yeah,
Nice.
there's a couple problems with the UI. Some check which I'll fix right now. Yeah, after that it's done.
That's fantastic. For my part, just if I recall correctly, someone is working on a subscription for that page.
I think it was there.
Nice. Yeah, which, given the inability to refresh the screen in the Docker desktop extension or the Docker extension, that just puts pressure on subscriptions. So that's great. But yeah, those Snackbars, those toaster notifications, that type of feedback to the user is really helpful.
Any other thoughts or feedback on that? Anyone else? Okay, I guess not. Moving on, Ashish, you have two back-to-back items.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep.
Yeah, so actually I have a cold today, so my voice will be a little low. So if it's inaudible, just tell me.
Yep.
I'm sharing my screen now. Yeah, so the first thing that I want to do, the first change was that the removal of meshery version. So before this thing, what we had was that in version you could search a meshery version, which didn't make sense actually. And that meshery version were the core components, and these components are the extra functionality that our adapters add on top of what the service meshes already have to offer. But those were categorized into their own different version, which didn't quite make sense. So a PR was recently added in meshery, and then subsequent PRs and adapters, which have standardized the use of versioning. So all of the components, whether they are our own custom components or they are the service mesh specific components, all are now versioned. So here you can see that authorization policy and mesh TLS authentication, these are Linkerd's own components, and then the add-on and the Linkerd mesh, these are our components. So basically, before this, if you were to drop it here, actually there is this small bug that I've pointed out. It happens only for Linkerd mesh and Istio mesh, this just one specific component, the rest are fine actually. So if I drag and drop Jaeger Linkerd add-on, it's fine. So basically before this, we had a version field around somewhere around here, and I've removed that. So if you drag and drop a Linkerd mesh from stable 2.11.2 and you deploy it, the Linkerd mesh of that version would be deployed. Same goes with the other add-ons as well, and same goes in Istio as well. So like if I go on to any version here, you have an Istio mesh component. Here also there is this issue, but I've again pointed it out. So this is with Istio mesh, Linkerd mesh. Each adapter has mesh component that it has this certain styling issue. So please look into that. Other than that, yeah. So that's pretty much it for this one update. If someone has questions regarding this, I can answer. Otherwise, I'll go on to the next item.
I had a quick one, just like yes or no, not a whole decision. Are you integrating with the viz component of Linkerd?
Yeah, actually, these are the viz components that you're seeing. These are basically internally what we're doing. We're just grabbing the manifest that they give us. So each service mesh has some add-ons, and they have these manifests for each version. So when we deploy a Jaeger Linkerd add-on or Viz add-on, we just grab the manifest for that particular version of the add-on and just deploy that.
Awesome, thanks. That's nice and future-proof.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so to like expound on Matt's question, one thing that isn't always obvious, and there's some faith maybe in here, and some faith in the amount of like regression testing that happens basically every single time there's a PR and every single time there's a release of an adapter, which is the notion that if Ashish, if you were to click on the versions drop down, maybe just for Linkerd, we would see that, you know, there's a lot of versions in here, and essentially that every instance of one of those components, like the viz add-on, that component is version, you know, every single one of those carries a version, and is versioned specific to, in this case, the service meshes version.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that happens whenever these components are built. So when these components are built, this is a two-step process. The first step is to basically generate the service mesh components, and just the second step is to grab the core components from the previous latest version and just copy paste them onto the newest version that generated components for.
and then there's a few, you know, I don't know that this is necessarily written down anywhere, but it's certainly been accounted for, that there's a few different, you know, scenarios in which someone might have an existing Linkerd deployed at an older version that's covered here. They might have a newer version of Linkerd deployed. Like there's various scenarios in which there's potential caveats. And we don't need to iterate through them all right now, but it's just a note. Maybe I'll just take a note that we should explicitly write down the behavior in each of those situations.
Yeah, so if you have already running Linkerd control plane of a specific version, you can just drag drop that version and click on undeploy, and that will, yeah.
I think what Lee might be referring to, I ran Linkerd in production for 2.5 years, fairly recently, through a bunch of upgrades, and I believe it's largely resolved in current Linkerd. But if anyone was running not so old versions, like I think even less than a year or a year and a half ago, as many might be doing, the upgrade involves manually deleting, like hard deleting explicitly the CRDs, because they don't handle CRD versioning didn't exist contemporaneously with earlier versions of Linkerd. Earlier versions of Linkerd 2. I'm not referring to the older Linkerd v1 pre-Kubernetes variant.
And that particular use case, actually, that Matt points out again about upgrade as a scenario that people are facing, that's the type of, I mean, to me, sitting in the operator seat, that's like, makes me quite uncomfortable. I scoot towards the edge of my seat because I get nervous about an upgrade, particularly for core infrastructure like that. And so that would, I imagine, call me to use a tool like this to the extent that it facilitates experimentation or verification or dry runs of different versions, running my services and helping facilitate kind of identify upgrade gotchas.
So that is exactly specifically how I discovered this project, like a couple of years ago, or layer 5 in general, because we had just gone from Franken Istio just to load balanced gRPC, but not a full control plane, to Linkerd. And then we were dealing with Linkerd deployed by Flux. And by the way, this scenario of CRD versioning is normative, for lots of other Helm charts and products. So it's not just a Linkerd thing, but it is a wrinkle that's now been fixed, I think. The other one that was a complicating thing before they added support for Cert Manager was, most of the ways that most people follow the documentation to install Linkerd the right way generated self-signed certs that time bombed after, I forget how long, a year, right? So like we actually had pieces of some of our clusters go down the first time that happened, when, someone forgot to go update a cert, and so we worked with Buoyant directly and gave them a lot of feedback. We EverQuote, rather, my team, around this scenario in particular, and gave them a bunch of feedback, and they actually went and did Cert Manager. So
with Cert Manager now, is it? I'm ignorant here, but are you? Do they make it easy to be notified about that type, or are you just set up an auto rotation policy? And
so Certificate Manager kind of handles rotation of certificates based on a number of predicates, and it also exposes a number of time series metrics that are scrapable via a Prometheus exporter. So you can have dashboard. We created dashboards, and they might just be on grafana.com now, but we created dashboards and alerts that would start squawking a month out, when it was time for certs to be rotated that had been created that way. I think, again, this is more of an upgrade thing. If you start fresh with Cert Manager integration, then you probably don't have this issue, outside of edge cases, which also we had happen to us. Istio, for example, and we had the same problem with Linkerd. If you hammer on it hard enough, the file change notifications for when the configuration changes, in this case the certificate, get missed because file change notifications in Linux aren't guaranteed. They're usually delivered, right? And so if they're not, then suddenly you have certificate failures and you have to bounce pods. But like there's, again, like until Cert Manager came into Linkerd, and I suspect the same is true for other meshes, there's all manner of hilarity in upgrade scenarios. But again, that's edge cases, and moving forward, it will be not a case. So I don't know what the support matrix is or how far back you need to support in this project. But.
Yeah, the upgrade scenarios get messy. I mean, messy for everyone all around, and including this tool trying to keep up with those. That's good. Ashish, you were going to show another item.
Yeah, the other item was regarding the removal of AMD hardcoding and compatibility. So basically, we have a multi-platform workflow that generates Docker images for both ARM and AMD platform. So if you go to docker.io/layer5, sorry. hub.docker. Yeah, sorry, I was putting the, yeah. So if you basically see any image from layer 5 or organization, most images will have two. Most images will have. There would be two images. One would be ARM compatible and one would be AMD compatible. And depending upon what machine you're running, when your kubelet or your Docker pulls the image, it will pull the appropriate image. So either so if I so basically we had this thing earlier. Lee had pushed this change of having both AMD and ARM support, but still some things weren't working, and the reason for that was we had some hard coding going on in the Docker file where we explicitly had, while creating the binary, we explicitly stated that we need to build it for x86. So that hard coding has been removed from here and from all other adapters as well. So now all the adapters are compatible with both ARM and AMD 64. Basically, there is one little thing that is left, and that thing is that meshery is still not compatible with ARM because of one caveat. If anyone has a suggestion here, I would really I would welcome that suggestion. So the problem, I can state the problem real quick. So basically, we use an alpine based image here in the in meshery. We use an alpine as a base image. But we had some libc dependencies because when we build the Go binary, we build it with the cgo enabled, because the SQL package that we use requires some shared objects which require there to be libc and other such dependencies. So this was the image that we had found that had those dependencies. But the problem is this is not for ARM. This is only for AMD, which crashes the which basically, if you try to build this image on ARM platform, it will fail. So we are on a lookout for an alternative for this. I have searched, but I couldn't found an alternative. So the alternative would be an alpine based image that has all the glibc dependencies and which is both compatible with ARM and AMD. I tried to manually install some of this stuff, make some updates, but every time I used to get a new form of error. So after a point, I thought that maybe having a proper base image would work. So if anyone has any suggestion of for an alpine based image that has the libc dependencies and is both ARM and AMD compatible, you're most welcome to create a PR on this Docker file and update the base image if you're able to successfully build it on an ARM machine as well. Other than that, the adapters.
So Ashish, either as a separate like a separate Docker file or as a different multi-stage or another stage in here, if you're using a full-blown alpine base image, did that not have the right headers?
Yeah, I didn't.
Okay. So if we move to like a Ubuntu or something much,
that
much
will have, but that would load the image.
Yeah, and so that can be a workaround in the meantime, where the image that uses the Alpine or that uses Ubuntu as the base image is the one that's tagged with, like there would just be a special tag, maybe just a point of configuration for folks like Prima or whomever wants ARM compatibility, that they would just, when they did meshery-CTL system start, when they were configuring their mesh config, that they would just modify the tag is a potential.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that.
I don't know if it's worth it, but I figured I'd point it out as you're thinking about the problem.
Yeah, if someone wants to run it on ARM and they replace this with the Ubuntu image, that would basically make things work. So yeah, that can work in the meanwhile. I've created an issue, and if I haven't, I will cross check and create one so that we know that this is an outstanding item. Yeah, so these were the two updates I had. And second, one more thing would be that earlier we were using a basically we were using our own binary, kubeopen API JSON schema binary. It was a Node.js based binary that we were using, and I think we are okay. So yeah, that binary is still there in some of the. So I think there are pull requests being opened in all of the adapters. I would be merging those. So the small update is that we are no longer using this this whole step because we don't no longer require this binary, because the schema validation that we do now, we use qlang for that, which is completely Go native. We use Go functions for that, Go packages. So this will be removed, and this also reduces the image size by 25 megs, I guess. So yeah, that's all from my side.
Any thoughts or feedback on that?
I think when you open that issue, Uzair, if you can, or Ashish, if you can, like, suggest that one of the temporary workarounds is to permanently modify the workflow that we have to have two different builds, to produce two different images, two different tags.
Yeah.
Because that's a different solution, and that's an enabling solution for Prima, whom I know you're going to follow up with today about performance management. You could suggest that to her. That's an easy enough
Yeah, I
thing
think
to
this
try.
this one can be closed. The issues in the adapters can be closed because the adapters now support the
Okay. Thank you, Ashish, for that. Moving on, Alpha, would you like to talk about the topic?
Yep, I will share my screen. Okay, so there is an issue in the meshery-CTL which has been existing like 2 weeks ago, where the token location of the configuration file, if the token is being given in the config file with this path, then it doesn't get expanded due to the fact that if you give like dot slash in the token location, that gets expanded and it gets recognized. But unlike npm, if you give the tilde slash symbol, the user home path doesn't get added into the location, and thus this causes an error. So I have been worked on an issue, and eventually I was able to fix this by adding the if else block, which checks if there is a tilde slash in the location field, then just add the user home directory into it as a string, then return the path along with it. So also Uzair reviewed and it was good as well, but he suggested like if there is a way which can be included, like if the path can be set as $token, like importing the file path from the environment variable. And I was just thinking if it would be better if we ask feedback from all of the folks in the community. So any feedback from this? And this one as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So to refresh my memory, so today an environment variable isn't supported. What is supported is either allowing people to override and specify the location of the token, or by default using the mesh config and the token that's identified in their configuration. So this would be a third option. Like, what would be the sequence of the order of precedence? Environment variable, mesh config, parameterized override. Is there a use case for the environment variable over the other two?
Currently we don't have the support for the environment variable case that has to be added. So this is the sequence, like if there is a absolute location given by the user, then return as the file. If the user has given the relative path with tilde slash symbol, so add the user home directory along with the path given by the user and then return it. Or else if there is no absolute path or given this path as well, then it is assumed that the mesh config is stored in the meshery directory and then return the config from that directory. So that's how the sequence is present currently. So I think we can add the sequence for the environment variable as well.
But probably more important things for us to work on. Like, I don't know that there's a good, like, that's a good, we can As a matter of fact, not probably, but I know for sure Husseina has had on her backlog for, I think, about a year now, like removing dependencies on other binaries, the AKS, EKS, Docker Compose. And I don't think that those have had much motion forward, but it would be great to take on things like that as opposed to adding a third solution for people to add their token. Like I just, Uzair mentioned it. Uzair, did you have a use case for it, or like was it inconvenient to use the mesh config? Or
I was thinking that if a user is using Meshery to manage their application, so they would have a directory or path where they are all storing their API keys or all the sorts of tokens. So there as well, they'll be storing the Meshery too.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, that makes sense. And which is configurable in mesh config today, because there's a file path inside of there that you can specify.
Yes.
Okay. So I will check on it, and yeah, that's it from my side for this. Yeah.
Thank you, Alpha, for sharing that. Any thoughts or feedback? Anyone else? Nope. Okay. Nitish, you're up next.
Yep. Let me share my screen. Okay, so I've shared the link for the doc. So if you guys are interested in like what, okay, I'm sorry, like my voice is low because I have some throat infection or something like that. So bear with me. Yeah, I've shared the link for the doc explaining like what mesh model is and stuff like that in case you're interested. But yeah, the doc, I'll try to keep it. I'll try to not go too far into that. So the update that I've made is regarding like it's like a central place where you can validate stuff that basically all the databases that are internal to Meshery. Although this doesn't actually have much impact currently, but then like in the future, like we'll be having some basically like we have mesh map and we have other components inside Meshery which want to validate stuff. And so earlier we used to have different methods of validation, as Ashish has just mentioned that we were using a node-based binary for validating the schemas of CRDs, but we've now moved to QLang because of various reasons that right now we're actually using Q for generating the components and also for validating, and Q actually offers a lot more than that. So we are actually trying to maximize like what Q has to offer, so validation with Q is very easy, and it's like I mean it's like the natural thing to do for us, especially because we have been especially because we have actually implemented Q in various parts of the code base. So so like the update is actually regarding using exposing a central endpoint where other components of Meshery can actually uh, send something and then like ask a Meshery server to validate it, and the validation is actually based on Q. So there are two parts of updates. One is in Meshery server, which basically exposes this endpoint, and then like it's being handled. This is the handler which does that. Well, basically the structure right now is that, I mean, it is subject to change. We might actually change this in the future, but right now it is expected to, the request is expected to have something like schema, the schema type and then value and then value type. So currently we support, so essentially like this is the validation. You should give a schema and then like you should give the value and it'll actually validate the stuff. So currently we support 3 different types. The schema or the value can actually be in JSON, YAML, and or JSON schema. This JSON schema is actually only specific to the schema. So this is basically directly derived from like what Q internally supports. Q supports conversion to and from JSON, YAML, and JSON schema. So that's basically it. And as long as like all of these things are actually valid, that is, if it's a valid JSON, if it's a valid YAML, then we go ahead and validate it. So we actually use the updated mesh kit is that Okay, just a second.
By the way, meanwhile, Nitish, I had a question. The question was that, okay, you can show your
No,
meshery.
go ahead. I was.
Okay, so my question was, can you go back to meshery? So basically, we have inside of the pattern engine, we have a stage, validation stage there as well, and there we use a different Go package to do the validation. So, like the whole dry run logic we have actually make sure that our design actually goes to only till that stage, till that validation stage, which is already present in the pattern engine, and then comes back from there. And this is a separate endpoint. So to me, why are we using, so if we are using qlang, shouldn't the case be that we completely remove that that schema validation that we are using there? If you go inside of the I don't remember the exact name, it is like it's a third stage after filler, it's I guess it's validation or something like that. If you go inside of models,
Yeah, actually, yeah, I get it. Like it's actually the intended use case is more generalized than pattern engine. That is like by other components, I mean that like it can be mesh map, it can be anything else. So it can either be, it can in the future, like we can even go to an extent of saying that like we would still have I mean, well, yeah, you could actually still replace the implementation that we have inside the pattern engine and use qlang in place, but then you could also use the same functionality that we have over here, and instead of sending a request to this particular endpoint, you could just internally make use of the packages offered by meshkit. So yeah,
yeah,
the
so
intention was to
the
generalize it.
the registry that you're using, sorry for interrupting, but the registry, that basically the thing that against which you're doing this validation, it's our registry, right? The where the components are registered.
No, this is completely, no, the schema can be anything actually. It's not related to our that, yeah, there is no registry actually.
Okay. Okay. So when you receive it, let's say that you receive a JSON. So the current, the inside of just tell me how is it different? Okay. So the current thing that we use inside of the pattern engine stage, what it does is that the schema that is registered by the adapter or any other component, it validates the coming YAML against that schema. So here, what the like by validation, when you take that JSON, against what schema is that being validated?
Yeah, the schema is also being provided as a payload. The schema and the value also actually is being provided as a value. So the thing is that right now, as you can see, like the endpoint was /API /mesh model and then /validate. In the future, we would have something like /API /mesh model /design /validate. So in that case, the value that we would be validating it against would actually be the, I mean, exactly like it would be still have the same thing, but then the schema would be hard coded, which would be the schema of a design. So it's something like that. So it's sort of like you get the point, right? Or is it?
Yeah. So the client supplies the schema in this case, but in the existing stage that we have, the backend has the schema.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll have to think about it and then I'll come back to you, because
Yeah,
we
sure.
have like schema at two different places, and I'll discuss. Let's keep take this
Yeah, we
on
can
Slack.
have the discussion later. Yeah. Okay, yeah. As I was saying, like yeah, the other part of the changes is actually in meshkit. And okay. These are basically the, I mean, it's actually like we're just directly exposing the capabilities that are offered by Q, and then like it's sort of like we're providing an interface on top of it so that like we can actually make use of the things. So yeah, that's it. If anyone has any questions, feel free to shoot them.
Nice. Yeah, we're about at time too. So what?
Yeah, just one thing is that like we'll actually have to update the docs in regards. Sorry. Yeah, in response to this change, but that can be dealt with.
There's a review of the pattern engine that needs to is overdue anyway. Good. What are we missing, Aditya?
Nothing actually. There's just this one last topic for Yash to give any updates for the UI restructuring. Yash, are there any updates, or is it just to go through the to review the PRs and merge them?
There are small updates on the performance profile page, but the main thing I wanted to talk is we had to merge these two PRs I have linked here. Yeah, because one of the PR was merged the patterns page, but those are related to these two PRs. So it is showing errors. It won't work until we merge
All right.
these are interdependent.
Okay. So yeah, I've shared the link to the PRs on chat. So please feel free to review them, and if they're good to go, we'll merge them. Alrighty, so we are a bit over time, but we have mostly covered all the topics. Rohit, we can talk about this topic on the website's call, if that's okay with you.
It's just like one line of code. I think Lee would have already looked at the, so that's not a problem.
All right, thank you all for joining then. I'll see you guys next week at the same time. Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Sid. Yeah. Bye, guys. Bye.
Bye. Bye.